share of addictions and battles to overcome. And everything happens for a reason, but I'm stronger now that I won. This is Big Easy Philosophy. It's a journey to recovery for you and me. Silent E.
Welcome. I said it once, I said it twice, I said it in the name of Jesus Christ. Welcome to my podcast. I'm your host, Silent E. Today's podcast, I have a guest. With us today, we have a special guest. His name is Levi. He has a tremendous story concerning addiction, concerning childhood, concerning family, concerning love and fear. But I'm going to leave it up to him, and he can tell you his testimony and beyond. Hello, Levi. How you doing today?
Good. How's everyone doing? I'm blessed to be here. Very excited.
We're more than happy to have you. You have a unique story that has so many layers to it. I don't even know where to start. We're going to do it like an open mic and let you talk about your childhood, growing up in the orphanage, your military background, your medic background, and your friends and family background. How did you become an orphan?
So, I'm born in West Los Angeles, Kaiser Permanente Hospital. My family comes from the South Central area. I have 8 older sisters and 1 older brother, twins that are younger than me, a younger brother and a younger sister. My mother was addicted to crack cocaine at the time of my birth. So when I was born in the hospital, I was actually taken out of custody at the time of birth, and I was born addicted to cocaine. So in the hospital, I had to be weaned off of cocaine, medical cocaine, for 2 weeks. And then after that, I was given over to foster care for custody and spent about 18 months in foster care, about 12 months or so. I think I was 6 months a foster child under my adopted parents before they formally adopted me, but their intentions were always to formally adopt me. So I only spent about 1.5 years officially in the foster care system, but I was never actually in custody of my birth mother. And then whoever my father was, we just can't determine because she was on drugs and nobody can really pinpoint who he is. But different than all of my other siblings ethnically. That's where my story began. And relatively quiet childhood up until about 4 or 5 years old, where it was pretty peaceful. I lived in Rancho Cucamonga area, which is a suburban area outside of Los Angeles in the Inland Empire in San Bernardino County. And my adopted father actually was addicted to crack cocaine in his early 20s. He was able to shake that addiction. He later became addicted to alcoholism, and he slowly but surely deteriorated as I got older as well over the next 10 years of my life by the time I was around 15 when my parents divorced. So those 2 individuals are the people who were the closest to me in my life that suffered from addiction.
Okay, I want to get a deep dive. I want to go deep into your story because it's tremendous. How many people ended up for high school in Florida, grew up in California? So can you talk about that transition for a moment?
Of course. So my time spent in Southern California was prosperous as far as my father was a very hardworking man. He's a contract painter by trade. He worked for Hacienda La Puente School District as a painter, and also had his own contracting business with my mother. My mother, God bless her, she's one of the sweetest women you'd ever know. One of the people who are good to a fault. Never suffered any addiction, but she had ended up with a herniated disc. She was born with chronic asthma, and then she had a really bad asthma attack when I was around 4 years old, and it went unnoticed by her primary care physician, and she ended up having a partially collapsed lung. So, and then her herniated disc came from her time. She spent 20 years working at Southern California Edison and sitting at a desk. She has, large breasts. I don't know how you'd put that, but it caused stress on her back. And so she ended up with 2 chronic illnesses, chronic asthma with a collapsed lung and chronic back pain from a herniated disc. And these things made it very difficult for her to be active and do certain things. And so my father, being very monogamous and dedicated to her, had to seek, I guess, other ways to care with himself, as she was unable to do a lot of the things that a wife would be able to do in an active relationship that, you know, her medical issues were keeping her back from. And so he turned to a bottle. Now, I don't think, obviously, that that's something that everybody would do, but him already having struggled with substance abuse in the past, it's not surprising that he would pick up to help him quell with the issues that he was dealing with at that time. Also, he was subject to abuse, verbal abuse, and neglect from his mother, and his father was an alcoholic. His father was absent. His name is James Owens. He's actually one of the first African Americans to be in the Air Force back in the 50s, 60s. He was never around for my father, and my grandmother ended up marrying a different man, and they had a different kid, and they pretty much all but ignored her two prior children, which the oldest, my aunt, actually left the house to live with her grandmother for better care. My father was subject to the direct abuse, severe verbal abuse from his mother, and just neglect from the new married father and also his biological father, which definitely probably aided in his descent to addiction in his former years. But he had managed to clean up before he had met my adopted mother, and they were cleaned up well. My mother was always a very clean person, never was on any substances or anything like that. And they had owned a house and had started a business, and both were working, and so they were prime candidates for adoptive parents and foster parents. My mother also had issue in a fallopian tube, so that she was unable to give birth. So my adopted father and my adopted mother actually don't have any biological children. I would be their only child, the one that they adopted. So a lot of focus was put on me as a kid, in a good way, and also later on in a bad way, of course. But I remember early on with the alcoholism, mainly it was more or less harmless. My dad would be up all night drinking beers, playing, at the time it was like a PlayStation 1. He would play Madden football all the time. He was a football guy. And it wasn't really abuse yet. He was a little hard on me, but I don't think that that was necessarily tied in at that point. But him having that strong male presence as his character devolved as I got older, and me not being very physical, as far as he was an All-American in wrestling and football and baseball, and I was an academic scholar. I'm very intelligent. He did not see eye to eye with that. His mother and his father were both very intelligent, and I think that was something that may have put him off. And also, he was never supported by his mother as far as with his sports and things. So he must have really wanted a son who was going to be active in sports and someone that he could basically live vicariously through. But it just wasn't me. So as I got older, it was more of a force for me to have to be involved in sports and activities like that, which I was actually not interested in. And that's kind of the beginning of where our relationship began to have issues. And I just felt like he was always trying to pressure me so much to be physically active, and it was just something I wasn't interested in. And being such an adept at academics, which is something that he's not very comfortable with, also put a barrier between us. As I became adolescent and becoming prepubescent and into my puberty, there was a direct friction between me and him. There were things that I were into, fantastical things, you know, Marvel comics and anime and things like that, that he didn't seem as important, that he wanted me to be socially adept, like a star football player, and involved in a lot of different activities, social activities, and I'm just not a very sociable person. I have a very small social battery. I remember we also had other foster children coming in and out of the house, and some of them were more aligned with how he was as a kid as far as being an athlete, and they would always be very, very kind, brotherly to me. But one day he brought us both out, me and my older foster brother, to do hitting drills for football. And, you know, I was in junior All-American, so it was, you know, 7 piece set, full pads and helmet. And, you know, my older brother is 15. I must have been 10. You know, he's clearly much larger and stronger than me, and knocked me so hard I had got a nosebleed. My helmet came down, my chin strap came down, and I had a nosebleed, and tears started rushing down my eyes. And he's drunk, it's the weekend, and he's like, well, hey, you know what, come here. And I was like, what? And he sucks me in my chest and sucks all the air out of me. He's like, you're just gonna get over this pain. This is just not gonna be something that you're gonna cry about, because life is gonna treat you like this no matter what. Now, it was a lesson, and it had been proven to be true, but it was also abusive. So from that point on, it became more and more physically abusive without any sort of real reasoning for why he was trying to so-called discipline me, as I wasn't really doing anything out of the ordinary for a child to do, but because I wasn't aligning with how he was as a kid, it was something that he just couldn't deal with. And also my mother's condition, keeping her from being able to do a lot of things, going out, you know, he wanted to go to Vegas, he wanted to go on cruises, and she just was not, she didn't have the energy for a lot of these things. Also, I'm guessing, you know, I can't verify or validate, but it just makes sense that obviously their sex life probably had to suffer a bit as well. With the herniated disc, I imagine it's probably not easy to just be having sex a lot all the time. So, and he was a very faithful man. He never cheated on her or anything like that, but he cheated on her with the bottle. And so the verbal abuse became worse and worse. He began to tell me how I'd never amount to be a man, how I was a sissy this, and how, you know, I was also very monogamous oriented, because that's all I knew as a kid in my household. And he would always tell me, man, you look so good, you need to be having all these girls. If I was you, I would have every girl in school on me. I wouldn't have any single girlfriend. I'd be just doing whatever I can. And that just wasn't me. I've never had that in me. I still to this day don't. But my mother began to notice more and more how this was negatively affecting me, to the point to where psychiatrists had diagnosed me with anxiety and depression before I was 11 years old, which is not really normal. I had already had attention deficit disorder that they had diagnosed me with when I must have been 6 years old, but as they continue to do treatment plans for that, they're going to also reassess your psychology. And yeah, they you know, as I was coming into 7th, 8th grade, they noticed there was a severe issue with my psyche as far as a normal kid should be and how I was behaving. And they noticed that it had to be something going on at the household. So my mother took notice of it, and it had been a couple years that she had let it deteriorate, but she had tried to fight to make him better, to try to put him through AA and treatment, and he just refused. So eventually a day came when I was 14, and she said, well, you're gonna have to choose the alcohol, or you're gonna have to choose me. And he didn't give her a real answer, but he did give her a real answer by continuing to drink. So as soon as she noticed that that was going to be the path that he chose, she began to make plans to escape, essentially. As again, he was verbally and physically abusive to me, and then he was becoming verbally abusive to her. And he was a primary breadwinner at the house, as she had been retired forcefully, of course, through medical retirement for having the herniated disc. And her income was limited, so she had to plan. She planned for an entire year and ended up looking all over different places on where she wanted to move, where she thought would be safe. And she ended up finding that there was a place in Naples, Florida that was affordable for her, and that she felt was far enough away that we would both be safe. And so a year later, one day I come home from school, she tells me, listen, tomorrow we're leaving. You can either stay with your dad here, or you can come with me. Now, of course, that was a no-brainer for me, as, you know, my dad had been hitting on me and doing things that were making me very, very uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for me to go to school because, being an intellect, a lot of people bullied me, and then coming home I was getting bullied by my dad. So it was a no-brainer for me to start over. And also my mother was just the sweetest lady, so of course it was a no-brainer for me to go with her. We packed up everything in a U-Haul van that we had packed up about half the house, my bed, her bed, a couple of the couches downstairs, and all our clothes and little belongings and things like that in a U-Haul. Before he even came home from work, we were gone on the road. We took the 10 freeway straight on down we came down from Victorville from the 210 down to the 10, and then took the 10 freeway all the way down to Florida, and then took 75 down to Naples, and took about 7 days. And it was very, very, very different for me. It was something that I had no idea how it would affect me, because I just couldn't see forward from that point, I was only 15 years old. I was still trying to find myself, but ultimately ended up being a very, very good thing for me. I ended up involved with big brothers, big sisters out there, had multiple different mentors, went to a lot of different mental health. I actually was hospitalized for 6 months because I was suffering so bad. I had basically just been acting out, in a sense, hanging out with kids that, I hadn't been doing any type of drugs or drinking or anything like that, but there would be like people who were experiencing homelessness and camping out in a lot of these rural areas. In Florida has a lot of these it was down in the Everglades, there's a lot of these forestry areas and stuff, open areas, and we would go on back in there and mess with their stuff and skip school. I remember taking my mom's van one day, and we had found a Red Ryder BB gun, and we took it from the homeless camp, and we got in the car and we drove down the street and shot the BB gun at people. It was the most ridiculous thing. But as a kid, I just didn't know, I was thinking that doing things like that was fun and cool, and just doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, and not excelling in school anymore, which is a big thing for them that they noticed, because, I went from going straight A's, honor roll student from 1st, 6th grade, 7th and 8th grade having a lot of trouble, in the 9th grade almost flunking, and my teachers knowing that every test that I take, I could sit in class and be nodded off almost, or twiddling my thumbs, or literally doing anything except what they would consider being productive, and then they'd be sitting there giving lectures and expecting me not to be absorbing anything, and then they'd sit a test in front of me and I would go ahead and get 98% on the test, as if I had absorbed every piece of information, and let them call on me and ask me a question. I would give them the correct answer every single time. So my teachers absolutely knew that I was high intellect, but there was an issue as far as drive, motivation, and things like that, and it was, having been abused and relocated, and so they sent me off to a crisis center. And there they determined that, yes, the abuse was enough that it was causing me social anxiety, which was causing me to behave, acting out. That's exactly what kids usually do when they have such social imbalances. I ended up graduating out of the program and going back to school at a halfway high school, transitional school, and of course excelling way beyond anything that they'd ever seen, because they're usually dealing with troubled youths who are dealing with substance abuses before the age of 18 and things like that. And I had actually spent the last year of my high school around a lot of kids who were doing things like Xanax and Percocets and smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol and partying and doing things like that, and I had even hung around them and watch them do drugs and things like that. And it was just never something that was appealing to me, because I had always associated it with the behaviors that my father was subjecting me to. And it's just something I never wanted to be. And so I graduated high school with honors and was eligible for I think it's called a Bright Future Scholarship program in Florida, where if you graduate with, believe above a 3.0 GPA, or 3.5, and then also above a 4.0. I think 3.5 grants you 75% of your scholarship for a 4-year university, and 4.0, 100%, something like that. And so I had qualified for 75% full scholarship of academic needs for Florida Gulf Coast University. My mother helped me apply and fill out my FAFSA, and I got in for one of the most prestigious major plans, which was biology BS, which is pre-med, because of course I wanted to be a doctor, or so I thought. And I shipped on out to Florida Gulf Coast from Naples, which is in Fort Myers, not very far, and I lived on campus. And there I started to experiment with substances. I had started smoking marijuana, had alcohol, tried some psychedelics, and even tried MDMA, or what they call Molly. When I experienced the MDMA, which is very similar to methamphetamine, I had such tachycardia, which is a high heart rate, that I felt like, my heart was going to stop and I was going to die. And so that was like the first time I ever tried it. So immediately, and from time as a child, my parents had told me, about the origin of my birth as far as drugs, in the sense that, in the 90s and the early 2000s, they had a DARE program, and it was probably evolved from the Just Say No and all that, to try to keep me in the know that if I had ever had an issue with certain substances, it could probably prove immediately lethal because of the circumstances of my birth, being addicted to cocaine. So as soon as I felt that heart jumping out of my chest and not being able to breathe, I definitely was like, you know what, this is probably not for me. And this is something that was normal for kids. A lot of these young cats who were experimenting in college and stuff like that, but it was a dead stop for me right there. And I've never had an addictive personality. I had a girlfriend who was smoking cigarettes in high school, and I had smoked a cigarette or two, and it's just not something that was interesting to me. And I enjoyed marijuana, but it was never something that I felt like I needed to have. And I ended up dropping out of the university, ended up falling in love with a girl and dropping out and going to work and trying to live a life with her, and ended up not working out for me. So then I moved back with my mother and decided I was going to join the Navy. And that happened all pretty quickly. I graduated high school a year early at 17, spent about a year at Florida Gulf Coast University at 18. 19 years old, I had already signed my contract for the Navy and shipped out right before I turned 20, like 3 months before I turned 20. And when I was selected by the military, they obviously gave me the ASFAB for my placement, and they placed me as a medic, just a hospital corpsman. And so I went to BMTCP in San Antonio, Texas. Upon graduation there, they decided that they wanted me to be a field medic, so they sent me to Field Medic Training Battalion and also surgical technician. There I also saw a lot of substance abuse, and I ended up signing up for the military's version of AA just to learn about the substance abuse. And I learned a lot, actually. I learned a lot about how these certain substance abuses, especially alcoholism, can actually pass down. And so there was a lot of extensive studies on whether or not it was hereditary or learned behavior or a combination of both. And it is actually can actually be hereditary, in the sense that my father, his father was an alcoholic, and his father's father was an alcoholic, and my grandfather was never in my father's life directly. So the substance abuse passed on genetically, in a sense, without a learned behavior in the household, as my grandmother and her new husband never suffered from any sort of substance abuses. But they did abuse him verbally and neglected him. So these things also helped push him towards a substance, but the actual addiction was something that was essentially genetic. But it can also be a learned behavior, and it doesn't always catch, but it can catch in a household where somebody is an alcoholic and the child sees that and they emulate the behavior. And it just didn't stick with me. I did the opposite. But I ended up marrying another corpsman, and she ended up suffering from alcoholism and substance abuse. She was actually sexually abused by her uncle. Her father was addicted to substances as well. Her biological father had been addicted to methamphetamine and alcohol and other different substances. And unfortunately, she ended up addicted as well. So while I never actually suffered addiction, it was definitely interesting to see that I had dealt with a lot of individuals, not only as a child, not only as the origin of my birth, but even the woman that I ended up not only marrying but having my daughter with. And believe it or not, I kept her clean. And she was only suffering from alcoholism at the time, but I kept her clean the entire time my daughter was in the womb and after birth and giving breastfeeding. But after that, she began to suffer again. She began to drink and smoke marijuana, and she got a DUI. She ended up totaling a car, couldn't keep a job, which is abnormal for somebody of her caliber, because She obviously scored very high on the ASVAB, and the military obviously saw something in her, as being a medic is not the easiest job to get into. She ended up getting discharged honorably with a medical discharge, mental health concerns that probably stemmed from substance abuse. And also, obviously, the abuse that she suffered as a child as well definitely was the foundation. But the current issues at the time, obviously she wasn't being abused at the time, but the substances had played a role in the deterioration of her at that time, which she actually was capable of overcoming as well. As you know, to my knowledge at this point, she's not suffering from alcoholism. She's spent years in therapy, worked on herself, and was polarized by being a mother, and her mother not really being there for her made her galvanized as far as wanting to be a better mother for her daughter, and so that played a very, very good role. And so now she is stand-up mother. She not only is a mother of my daughter, has another daughter by her new husband, and he has a daughter that's older than my daughter. So there's 3 little girls in their house, and they take care of them all very well. They're both working. Neither of them have substance abuse issues. So I've also seen people overcome them. Unfortunately, my biological father still suffers from alcoholism, and that caused such a deterioration in our relationship that we don't have an active relationship at this point. I still love him, I still respect him, and there's plenty of good things that he's instilled in me. My parents, they raised me old-fashioned. I had something called the Black Book, and it was a book, chivalry essentially, and manners. I'm talking etiquette, literally. How to address somebody properly, how to sit at a table properly, life socially. And then also he was a hard worker, very hands-on. I was young, learning how to cut in as far as painting goes, masking. He was fairly skilled at carpentry and tiling and things like that, and keeping me working and giving me a work ethic to know, do things the first time the right way, so that, you don't have to come back and do them again, and things that to me are a no-brainer, but as a lot of people probably know in this modern day and age, is very few and far between and hard to come by. So, it wasn't all bad. It was not all bad. There's so many redeeming qualities about him, and I think that goes for a lot of people who end up addicted. It's so simultaneously in the same body, how someone can be such a stand-up individual or such an impressive individual, and then meanwhile they're haunted by something that's eating them away and killing them, literally. My father now, he suffers from health issues. He's been hospitalized a few times in the past 5 years, and his health is deteriorating. It's not getting any better, and he's continuing to drink. He's not abusive to his new girlfriend or anything, but he's 60 years old. A lot of the things that he did when I was younger, he's physically, literally incapable of now, and it has actually cost him a lot of relationships. And he's still a good grandfather to my daughter, and the time that he's allowed to spend around her, he spends in a positive manner. But it's sad to see that he has had so many different people, even his own father, in his later years, after he had been a father himself, had reached out to him and let him know, what, my grandfather showed me his AA coins of being 40 years sober, and talked to me extensively about his suffering with alcohol and how that played in his role as a father. And he was there for my father as much as he could be after he had finished dealing with himself and his own issues. But my father just never took, as far as it's something that you want to decide for yourself. You can lead a horse to water, but you just can't make them drink.
Let's revisit or circle this same topic in more depth, if you don't mind, because the question I have, and it's 2 parts. The first part, do you believe your relationship would have played out different if it wasn't for the generational gap, or if it wasn't for the drug abuse? What in your mind and in your heart was the main disconnect?
I definitely think it was the alcohol, because like I said before, he had deteriorated into the alcoholism. It's something that's gradual. It's not something that, I remember him, like I said, drinking beers to where when I was in high school, he was, drinking a 5th of Hennessy or E&J in a sitting. And I mean, like it wasn't anything. And that's when he became more and more violent over the years. So he was, like I said, he was a very good father for many, many years. And I have had so many good times with him. And he was originally very interested in my academics just as much as it was me being involved in athletics and things like that. My father and my mother put me through classical piano training and took me to spelling bees. I went to Disneyland. I mean, my father he was a very loving guy. He tried to really impart everything good that he had to me, but the alcohol is what definitely came in between him, not just me, but my mother as well. He was always a good husband, and I never seen him cheat. I never seen him call my mother out of her name, until later on when the alcohol would come in, and it was like constantly partying. When I was in junior All-American, when I was 10, 11, 12, he would, every time we would go to a game, all the other parents that were drinking and doing things, they would always go out and, they'd bring the kids and we would all hang out at somebody's house, but the parents would just be getting sloshed, you know what I mean? And that's when, I would hear him say things, just disgusting things, not even just about me, about my mother. I remember one day he actually told our neighbors that I was adopted, and nobody knew, and you probably wouldn't even be able to tell, because my mother, she's light skinned and my father's black, and I'm light skinned, and so it wasn't something. And the features, they're almost uncanny. It almost looks like, yes, they are my biological parents. So it was just a weird thing to deal with at that time, and something that I didn't really feel comfortable with everyone knowing. And so the alcohol would just make him loose-lipped. And I remember him coming back and apologizing to me about screaming and hollering about how I'm just an adopted kid and this and that. And it was a disconnect there. It just felt like I wasn't really his kid. But my mother never made me feel that way. And this is later on. This was 13 years old or so, almost 14, right around the time where my mother was about fed up with it. The physical abuse got worse as I not only got older, but as he deteriorated more into alcoholism. My parents were church going. I had attended by their choice and pocket. My father worked very hard to pay for me to go to Christian schools as a kid. I think I spent 4 of my 6 grades, 1st through 6th, in Christian school. We went to church. We prayed at breakfast, lunch, dinner, and before bed. I had a very beautiful illustrated children's Bible, and he was a God-fearing man, but I definitely feel like his substance abuse had caused him to deteriorate. Now he doesn't go to church. Now he will say basically, I don't really care what God thinks about what I do, and I'm just going to keep doing it. And his relationships with his sister, my aunt, deteriorated, my cousin, and people that really loved him and that he really impacted. Now he's soured those relationships to the point to where I just talked to my cousin 2 days ago, and she told me, I have absolutely no contact with him. I want him to have nothing to do with me and have no knowledge of where I'm at or what I'm doing, or have no contact with my children. She doesn't necessarily agree with my ex-wife allowing him to be an active grandfather because of the level of abuse that he's put me through. I talked to my aunt the other day, and she also told me, I witnessed him abuse you in ways that nobody should have to experience, and that I know definitely that some of the things that you've had to go through as an adult are a direct reflection of this. And it's really hard for me to look them in the face and say, there are good things that he's done that have stuck with me. Because for them, they just feel sorrow, and contempt as far as not being able to help or stop him from doing these things while I was a kid. But it was never their job to anyways. I don't know if that answers your question right or not.
To be honest, as you speak, it's so many things that runs through my mind. I get a sense of everything you said, that you never felt like you belonged as a child. And let me put preference on this right here. My grandmama raised me. The thought never entered my mind about me belonging. So just to hear you speak out of your passion about the relationship between you and your father subsequently bring me to another question, the part 2. Why do you think the dynamics of father-son relationship concerning love is so volatile in the black community?
I definitely think there's an agenda, and I don't want to get too far into like a conspiracy air, but I definitely think that there's an agenda. My grandfather actually told me that his grandfather was a slave, and his grandfather beat the shit out of his son because he felt that if he didn't beat him hard enough, that he would not be ready to be beat by the master. And then this is something that his father did to him, and picked up a bottle, and he wasn't a slave, but he still beat the shit out of his son because he felt like life was going to beat him way worse, and he felt like it was a level of conditioning, which again, something that my father actually directly told me once as a kid, that nothing in life is going to beat you harder than I am.
And I can speak on certain parts of, because your father and I are of the same generation. So I understand where your father's coming from. I understand that mentality and that ideology because I lived it. But I was just wondering, at your age to be a young man, how did that affect you? Because our generation, we had no choice but to be physical. And I could give you a whole litany of examples, but I'm not going to go into it. But just that generation, we was very physical. And a lot of times as kids, we didn't have a voice at all. Back in the 70s, kids was property. Women and kids was property of the husband. But I was just wondering and concerned because a lot of times, as you alluded to, there's such thing as generational curses and generational blessing. Being in a solid relationship, a wholesome relationship as father and son, when we have kids of our own, we emulate the same things that we was taught, but it's just the fact of life. You cannot become some you never saw before. If you never experienced such a love from a father, it's hard for you to duplicate or emulate that. Say your part.
Right, I definitely agree. And I definitely agree that there has been such a rapid change societally as far as how this has been accepted. I mean, I remember going home from school and having bruises on me from being beat by my dad, and Department of Child Family Services coming to the house, and I looked them in the face and I said, no, nothing, I don't know, didn't take off my clothes. I said, no, I'm fine, and that was about it. They came and went, and that was it. Nothing ever came of it. But nowadays, they'll just take your kid from you at school before they even get home. Things have definitely changed a lot. The perception of spare the rod and things like that. They don't want you touching your kid at all anymore, period. They don't want you to physically hit on your kid whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. I don't necessarily agree with that. Now, I personally have never had to physically discipline my daughter just because she's not the type of person who needs that kind of discipline. However, I have been around children who I feel like may need a level of physical discipline because they're going so far out of the way that it's trauma based. So it's something that's going to traumatize you into action. And historically, we know that what they call epigenetics, which is gene expression, which is the basis of Darwinian evolution theory, in your lifetime, going through such a traumatic experience can permanently change your DNA and how you think and behave. That can be passed on to your children, so that it's a survival instinct. So you're trying to traumatize your child in a way that is going to keep them from repeating this behavior that you're seeing as an issue. But there's a line that can be crossed that breaches into abuse versus discipline. And the way you can actually gauge that, I think, is completely eradicated when you're severely affected by substance abuse. So, as far as the new generation, it's really sad because I don't think kids have ever had as easy access to substances, as little friction to keep them from these kinds of substances. I remember one day, so I'm from Southern California, I remember one day hanging out in high school and some of the other kids are gang members and so on, and they beat me up one day and handed me a red bandana and told me I was going to be a blood and this and that, and I came home with this bandana in my pocket. And my dad beat the shit out of me. And he said, look, you're not going to be in any gang. that's not for you. But you want to get beat up, I'll beat you up, and then you tell them to come here and I'll beat them up too. And so, he took the bandana and threw it in the trash, and that was never something that I had to deal with. But I remember that being something that definitely set me in, like, my dad beat me way worse than them kids was ever going to be able to beat me. And it wasn't something that he didn't break any bones, he didn't cause me to bleed necessarily, but he definitely inflicted enough pain in my head that I associated, I don't want to do this. For whatever reason, this is clearly not good for me. So I think that things like that can essentially work. I know this is very controversial these days because people are very, very sensitive to a lot of things, but that's a big issue right now. I mean, there's so many different avenues for help for kids who are dealing with issues, and just like that, there's so many things that are keeping parents hogtied to be actual parents to their own kids. They want everything to now go out of the household into the system. God forbid a parent has any alternative parenting style, they're going to crucify you essentially if they can find out about it. Social medias and the thickening of populations and things like that, and the decriminalization of certain things in a lot of places. There's a lot of places that they're decriminalizing psychedelics like mushrooms, and there's a lot of places that have legalized cannabis and things like that. And these kinds of substances are now very, very easy to get into the hands of children, to the point to where they have candies and things like that in wrappers that look exactly identical to candies you get at the store. And they'll allow the kid to consume this, then they'll crucify the parent, and then the kid will still have access to this. They'll throw them in the system, and the kid will continue to have it. It's a catch-22 these days. So
I'm going to allow you the opportunity to speak to the kids in the orphanage that's being adopted, or have already been adopted, and live in dysfunctional homes, or homes there's a lot of drug abuse of parents. What would you say to them kids?
And you know what? My older brother, he had suffered much worse than I did as far as the instability in foster parents. He was never adopted. He was hopping from foster home. He's been in group homes around a lot of meth addicted people and things like that. And in inner city Los Angeles and South Central and things like that, places like Nickerson Gardens and things like that. And he was never addicted. But it's really going to end up, I want to first tell you that God loves you. And God is your father, Abba. So you will always be loved. As long as you're breathing and your eyes are open, and even before then and afterwards, He is in control and loves you. Now, we also still have a choice. We have our own will and choice to decide whether or not which path we want to go down. But you don't have to feel like the environment that you're currently permanent. Even as a child, you cannot see past it, but there is a transition and a growth and a change that will come. And when it does come, make sure you love yourself first, because a lot of this that I noticed with my father, it comes from him not being able to love himself. And I was so well loved by my mother and my aunt and my cousins, and people had edified me so much as a kid. There was more edification by people in my community than there was negative verbal abuse by my father, that it allowed it to cement into my head that I had worth. So I would tell any kid of any background in any situation that you have worth in yourself, and that your worth is identified by God, not by your parents, not by your adopted parents, not by the people running your group home, not by case managers and Department of Child Family Services, not by your aunts, uncles, grandmother, anybody. You have to find your own self-worth, love yourself. God loves you first. The easiest way to love yourself is to know that God will always love you. So there's always somebody that loves you. And so He wants you to love yourself as well. And if you love yourself, you should not do things that are going to cause harm to yourself, which addiction can do. And it could be addiction to anything. You could be addicted to purchasing collectibles, and you could buy yourself into a hole and not be able to be financially stable. I know kids probably aren't going to understand this, but as long as you love yourself, you'll know moderation, and you'll know that you'll be able to experience something without it experiencing you. So yeah, definitely love yourself and know that you're loved, and know that the world is bigger than your household. The world is more than just what you're seeing your parents do, or the people that are caring for you now at this point. That your care ultimately comes from higher than them as well, because they're being cared for by God as well, along with the system, along with people around them, or not. And even if they're not caring for themselves properly, the Lord's eyes are still on you and them. and he's still in complete control, and it's all for his glory. So it all will come full circle, not if you want to, but because he will make it that way. And as long as you can find God, you will be able to find peace, and you will be able to overcome. My father, he turned his back on God, and that's why he's currently where he's at. And I still have faith that he can overcome, because he does still have God inside him, and he still wants to love God and be God-fearing, but he's afraid. Fear is not something that comes from God. As a matter of fact, fear is really something that's pointless. It's based off of, in my opinion, a lack of understanding. I think the biggest fear comes from ignorance or a lack of understanding of something. It's an unknown that really causes a fear, but you don't have to feel like because you don't know, you have to be afraid, because God is already knowing. He's all knowing. And so you should allow him to remove that fear by giving up whatever ails you, whatever troubles you, to God that does understand way beyond what you could possibly hope to understand. And you'd be amazed. I've been carried through so much trial and tribulation. I mean, I could easily be dead by now. I'm from South Central, I've lived all over the place. I've been in places, I've been in the military. There's so many different things that could have caused me to no longer be here right now. But for whatever reason, God has a plan and a purpose, and he's seen me through. And so many of these situations, I didn't see any light at the end of the tunnel, but God did, and he was, and he still is. And so I'm here. And so that is true for you. That's true for anybody listening to this. My experience, rather.
Alcoholism does more than affect our families, our jobs, and our social life. It affects everything, including our health. This is the Speakeasy Philosophy Podcast with Silent E, a podcast for the alcoholic looking for information, for guidance, and solutions. Your host is dedicated to helping you move beyond your addiction, finding your way back to health of mind, body, and spirit. Relax and listen. Here's your host, Silent E.
Welcome back. I'm excited. By far, this is one of the best podcast episodes I ever had before. I thank you, Levi. And we're going to cut into a couple of more subjects. We're going to talk about a couple of more subjects while we yet have the time.
I'm just very happy to be here, very blessed, and definitely excited.
I don't know how much of my podcast you listen to, but the whole premise of Silent E. Spirit moved one night and gave me this and showed me this and blessed my heart. That everything I thought I did when I was an addict, and I did for my family, my wife, and my kids, I thought I was doing it out of love, but it wasn't love. I was doing it out of duty. And the Spirit showed me what I thought was love, L-O-V-E, wasn't love, because the E was silent, because they couldn't hear what I was saying because they was too busy watching what I was doing. And with that being said, that the E is silent. Tell us your theology concerning love. In other words, what does love mean to the House of Levi?
Love is a very difficult thing to understand, I think, for people, because what people have heard or can associate with the word love can sometimes be just as beautiful as it is ugly. I've heard people say that you could love something so bad you kill it. And I think the Germans have like 5 different distinct words for love of different kinds. But I remember being in church once. I don't remember who the pastor was or what church it was, God forgive me. But the way he explained it to me stuck with me. And he explained to me that basically the way the cross looks can be compared to how love works with God and how love works without God. Love can be connected between two people, but it's at a more of a horizontal level. Now, that horizontal level is going to just sit flat on the ground because there's nothing to hold it up. And you can't really do much with that. But when the foundation of love comes from God to you, it builds that vertical beam that foundation, that now this horizontal love between you and someone else can be raised up. And I do think it's hard for somebody to love another person without loving God, or without understanding God's love for them first. I had my struggles with faith as a young man, and had a lot of toxic in relationships where I definitely loved somebody, but I knew that it wasn't being expressed properly because I had my back turned to God, period. And when I was honest enough with myself that God did love me and I was not accepting it properly, I understood that this is a main flaw in why my relationships were not working. And then turn around, and both me and my partner loving God together and each other, it was so much more sturdy and stable. And nothing's perfect. No human is perfect. And love is something you have to work at. And it can definitely deteriorate if you're not actively working on it, and you're not actively giving energy into it. I've definitely dealt with a lot of unrequited love, which is difficult to love somebody or something and not to feel the love back. But that doesn't necessarily make your love invalid, and it definitely should not discourage you. I think you're definitely allowed to love somebody without you feeling or understanding their love back. And some people also have issue that they have to work with as far as their expression of love. And it's very difficult to navigate whether or not you want to invest in somebody like that, because we need to also feel love just as much as we want to give it. And when you're dealing with somebody and you have a capacity to show love in a healthy manner and they don't, you have an option of standing by them and trying to help them work through it to become more capable of expressing that love in a positive fashion, or you have to actually look yourself in the mirror and identify whether or not this is healthy for you, and whether it's going to cause you to degenerate to a point to where you can't properly show love. Because yes, if you deal with somebody who is not working on themselves and not working with God to better love themselves and love others, they can definitely bring you down and make you bitter in ways, and give you learned behaviors that cause you to express love in ways that are poor as well. And definitely I've been around people who love in a way that's toxic and degenerative, and inside themselves they care for this person immensely, tremendously, but what's actually being manifested is destructive. And same way, I've been around people whose names I can't remember, who I may have only seen once in my life, and have shown me so much love just for humanity, for other people, that has reinvigorated my hope for the future, for kids, and for the world we live in. So being good and goodness and love, these things, they come at their purest forms from the highest levels and the highest realms, where edification and light are the only things that can last. God is love, God is light, and light is the highest vibration. It can travel farther and faster than anything in the universe. And darkness, it simply cannot stand up to light. Just like I think that hatred cannot stand up to love when done properly. And also, speaking of hate, I think that personally, in my opinion, I believe that you cannot hate something without originally loving it. You can dislike something greatly, but I've truly experienced hate in my heart at a point in time for my adopted father. My abusive relationship that I had suffered with him brewed a hate, but it was because of this deep love and adoration that I had for him, and this feeling of being let down and betrayed that inside me that built up such an anger. Full transparency, I ended up actually having an altercation with a roommate where I almost killed him. Formally trained by the United States Marine Corps as a combat medic, and so I have a level of knowledge in combat that a lot of civilians don't. And I actually used to suffer from PTSD, nightmares, night terrors, in which I would be physically dominant and basically beating up my adopted father, who would beat on me as a kid. And the night before the morning that I beat this guy up, I had one of these nightmares, and I had a vivid nightmare of me beating my father to a pulp. And I woke up that morning and I walked downstairs, and this guy had been giving me issues and being nasty to me without me doing anything to him back. But I don't know, this day I woke up and I just was not having it. I went down and I just let all of this pent up aggression out on him. And, I could not be sitting here right now, if he ended up getting worse in the hospital than he did getting better. And so that's when I recognized the hatred that was inside of me. And I had to take a seat and look at myself in the mirror and understand that, this hatred is born out of love, and I can go back to that love. The hatred does not have to control me, but it was controlling me because I was letting it, because I was ignoring it. But you have to face these traumas that you've had head on and understand that this is something that every single organism on the planet goes through. Not just humans, not just animals, but every organism goes through trauma, stress, pain, suffering, death, but can still thrive and succeed and love, procreate and create and be beautiful. Flowers can get torn to shreds by the winds and still germinate and grow again next spring into another beautiful flower. So I definitely think that love is a very, 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 very complex thing, but it can also be just the simplest thing ever. It could just be goodness between one thing to another. And the simpler you make it, the better. The more complicated you allow it to become, the more jaded and potentially destructive it can be. You can love something so much that it causes you to hate anything else, and that's wrong. I think love should be more broadly over-encompassing of the things that you come in contact with and not turn you away from anything, because there's various different ideologies in the world that will tell you to love something and simultaneously tell you to hate everything else. I don't think that's love. God's love is all enduring and all encompassing, and that's what we should really be emulating. God doesn't single out any group or entity or idea for love, or at least as far as what Jesus teaches us. To love your neighbors, you love yourself, which means to love yourself first and to love God as he loves you. And God loves, period. Otherwise, nothing we have here would exist anymore. It could be gone just like that. And science can tell you that, supernovas can just give out, and comets can come doing this and that, or, the frailty of life is amazing, just as the resilience of it is. So there's a tandem, there's a balance that's hanging, and there's something very, very, very intelligent and powerful behind it all, and it's God. And the beauty behind it, you look at the awe of these things, you can feel the love. That's what you really have to search for. That's what you really have to absorb and appreciate to be able to express it. Look for the good in things. It's so easy to feel and experience and take a hold of negativity, but I guarantee you, in my personal opinion, the positive has always far outweighed the bad. Just like the light far can outshine that pit that looks so endless of darkness. As soon as the flicker of light, you can see it as far as it is, wherever it's coming from. Stars way out in the galaxy in the night sky, penetrating through that blackness. You cannot stop it. You cannot stop love, no matter how hard you try. So
I have been on the edge of my seat since this interview started. And once again, I'd like to say thank you. You truly blessed my heart today. And now we're wrapping up. But before you leave, I would like for you to give a word of inspiration to the addicts out there, to someone out there that want to quit, want to give up their addiction, but just don't know how. Or maybe they're in a place that's so dark that they can't see the light. Maybe they're so wrapped up in their emotions, don't understand how to get out of their addiction, how to move beyond their addiction, and make a better choice than what they're making. Give us the last inspirational words before we leave.
God loves you. It's something very interesting to me about Alcoholics Anonymous, and again, something that I've been to. I've been to the Al-Anon, I think it's called, for families. And also, when I was sitting in jail, I would go to the AA meetings every once in a while, let you get out of the cell and all this little stupid stuff. But and also in the military. But one of their I think their first and main pillars is to believe in a higher power. And I think that is really, really important to have a spirituality behind it, to know that Silent E told me to meditate on a verse, Ephesians 6, verse 12. And definitely there's a spirituality behind it. And you have to understand that there's not only forces working against you that you can't see, but there's forces working for you that you can't see. And the forces working for you are far more powerful. The only thing is you have to tap into it. You have to want it. Please, 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 if you're trying to get over addiction, try. Just take a step. It doesn't matter if you fall back 5 more, get up and walk forward again. He will keep you going. There are avenues, there are ways, there are so many people out there that want to help you. You just have to want to be helped. The number one thing that I saw my father suffer from is himself. He just didn't want the help. He just didn't want it. You gotta want it. As long as you want it, it will come, I guarantee you, and God will make a way. He loves you. There's something bigger than you that is involved that will be able to help take that weight off of your shoulders. I have seen people severely addicted to methamphetamine, severely addicted to heroin, severely addicted to fentanyl, severely addicted to alcohol, addicted to cigarettes, addicted to candy and caffeine. And when they want it, he will make a way. Where there is a will, there is a way. If you can come 50%, he will meet you and take that other supernatural 50% that you are not equipped for. And you don't have to feel like you're alone, because you're not alone. You're never alone. I don't care if you're on the streets in the cold and there's nobody around you. He's still there with you. Seek and you shall find.
Thank you for coming. You truly blessed our hearts, and we really appreciate you. And we'll be doing this again in the immediate future.
Thanks for listening. We are so glad you've connected with us today. We are not only here to encourage you, but to offer you resources and solutions. See our website, speakeasyphilosophy.com, for a coaching program designed to assist the alcoholic in their road to recovery. We would love to help. You can also find us on social media by searching the Speakeasy Philosophy Podcast. Check back weekly for new episodes. Until next time, with love, speak easy to yourself.